There's something that you need to know before you start pursuing a career in data analytics, but most people skip this, not because they're lazy, but because no one explains it early enough. I see this constantly with students and people trying to break in. They learn all the tools, follow all the roadmaps, and even finish all the courses, but they still feel overwhelmed, stuck, and unsure if they're even doing everything right. Because the problem isn't effort, it's starting without the right mental model. So in this video, I'm going to explain what data analytics actually is, how this career actually works, and what you need to understand before you go any further. Not more tools, not more tutorials, just clarity. If you get this part right and you still want to pursue data analytics, everything else becomes much simpler. So let's get into it. I want to start by naming something that you probably already felt but couldn't quite articulate. You've been learning, you've been trying, you've been watching all the videos, tutorials, bookmark all the roadmaps, probably even start a course or two, but somewhere along the way, the quiet frustration has crept in. Like you're spinning your wheels while everyone else gets it except you. Here's what I need you to understand. That feeling has a name, and it's called the illusion of competence. And it's a documented psychological phenomenon. It works like this. You watch a tutorial, you follow along, the instructor makes it look very easy. And because you're following their steps, you feel like you're learning. But the moment you close the video and try to do all the work yourself, your mind goes blank. Say you're practicing your amazing basketball moves in the driveway for months. You got the crossover down, the dribble looks smooth. In the driveway, you are a superstar. But you step into a real game with actual competition, and then all that driveway practice does not translate. That's exactly what happens when you close the tutorial and open a blank SQL editor, or when someone hands you a messy spreadsheet and says, "Can you figure out what's going on here?" You freeze because you've been practicing, but you've never actually played the game. But this is not a you problem, this is a learning design problem. And this is why so many people get trapped in what I call the tutorial loop, consuming content endlessly but never actually building the right skills properly. Albert Einstein said it perfectly. Information is not knowledge. The only source of knowledge is experience. So if you can imagine walking to a massive library, picking up books, reading the covers, and comparing table of contents, but you never actually sit down and write anything yourself. That's what most aspiring analysts are doing, researching the path instead of actually walking it. And today we're going to stop reading the covers and table of contents, and we are going to write our first chapter, something most roadmap skips entirely, a clear mental model of what this career actually is, why it exists, and where you fit into it. That's what the rest of this video is all about. All right, so let's get foundational for a minute, because I think a lot of the confusion in this space comes from people not actually understanding what a data analyst does. So I'll just make it plain and simple. Data analytics is not about making charts, it's not about knowing Python, and it's definitely not about collecting certificates. At its core, data analytics is decision support. You take messy, incomplete, and sometimes contradictory information, clean it up, and you find patterns. And then you have to translate what you find into something a business or stakeholder can actually use to make better decisions. That is really it, and that is the job. Data analytics equals turning raw data into clarity that drives actions. Now, why does this matter so much to companies? According to research, 94% of enterprises say data and analytics are important for their business growth, but only 60% of those same companies say that they struggle with data silos and lack of clarity. They have the data, but they can't make any sense out of it. So that gap between we have all the data and we understand what it means is actually where you come in. You're not just someone who just runs code, builds pivot tables, and lives in Excel all day. You are the person that brings clarity to the chaos. Let me tell you a story that captures this perfectly. You've probably heard of Moneyball. Before Billy Beane and the Oakland A's revolutionized baseball, scouts evaluated players the old-fashioned way. How do they look? How fast can they run? And do they have the typical baseball body? But the analysts looked at something completely different. On-base percentage, a stat that most people ignored. They actually found value where everyone else saw nothing special. And with one of the smallest budgets in baseball, they built a team that competed with the richest franchises in the league. That's what you're training to do. You're not just looking at a scoreboard, you're looking at the underlying stats that actually win the game. And you're finding the hidden value that everyone else just walks right past. And this is why I want you to think of yourself as a translator. The business speaks one language, revenue, churn, customer lifetime value, conversion rates. The database speaks another language: tables, joins, queries, schemas. You are the bridge between those two worlds. You take what the data says and you turn it into something the business can actually act on and understand. Without that translation, the data just sits there, useless, and the business just keeps guessing, and then nothing changes. Now, let me clear up some confusion that I see all the time. People mix up data analyst, data scientist, and data engineer as if they're interchangeable, and they're not necessarily. Data analyst, you focus on insights, reporting, answering business questions, you build dashboards, create reports, and present recommendations. Your value is telling the business, here's what's happening, here's why it's happening, and here's what we should do about it. Data scientist, your focus is prediction and experimentation. You build models, you run tests, and you work with machine learning. Your value is telling the business, here is what will likely happen next and how confident that we are. The data engineer, your focus is infrastructure. You build the pipelines and the systems that move data from place to place, and your value is making sure that data is clean, accessible, and reliable at scale. These roles overlap in the real life, but if you don't understand the distinctions, you'll end up studying for the wrong job. When I was figuring out my path, I looked at all three. Data scientists had all the hype back then. Everyone was pushing it, the sexiest job of the 21st century, everyone said. But I knew myself more than anyone else. I got a D in discrete math in college, and I straight up failed Calculus 3. And I was not about to go back and fight calculus and heavy statistics. I just did not have time for that. What I was good at was understanding processes, problem solving, and creativity. I grew up drawing, writing poetry, and even writing raps. So I chose analytics. I focused on SQL, Excel, Tableau, and visualization. I personally love the ability to turn numbers into narratives and being able to uncover what most people did not see. That decision saved me months of wasted effort and not chasing the hype and forcing myself into something that did not fit my strengths. Okay, so now that you understand what the job is, let me reframe how you should go about learning it. Most people approach this career like a checklist. Learn SQL, learn Tableau, learn Python, build a project, and then apply to jobs, and then wait. And then they wonder why nothing happens. Here is a problem with that approach. You're optimizing for tools when you should be optimizing for value. Arthur Nielsen, the pioneer of market research, said something that always stuck with me. The price of light is less than the cost of darkness. What he meant is that clarity always pays itself. The cost of understanding something is always less than the cost of staying confused. And that's exactly what you're selling as an analyst. You're not selling SQL skills, you're not selling dashboard building, you're selling clarity. You're selling the light in places where businesses are stumbling around in the dark. A study by the IDC found that data professionals spend about 67% of their time searching for and preparing data, not analyzing it, not building models, not presenting insights, just finding the data and cleaning it up. So that tells you something important. The real work isn't in fancy Python libraries or fancy machine learning algorithms. The real work is in the cleanup. It's in understanding the messy, incomplete data and turning it into something usable. So here's the mental model I want you to learn: question, data, cleanup, insight, recommendation, and then impact. That's the analytics value chain. Every step matters, but notice where it starts. Not with the data, but with the question. And notice where it ends. Not with a dashboard, but with impact. If you can walk someone through that chain, and if you can explain how your work moved from question to impact, you'll stand out in every interview. Because most people cannot do that. They can talk about all the tools, all the code, but they cannot talk about value. So let's get practical. If you want to understand this career clearly, you need to also understand 4 pillars. These aren't optional. They're the foundation everything else sits on. So pillar number 1, business thinking. This is where most people fall short, and it's the hardest thing to teach. A good data analyst doesn't start with a data set and ask, what can I find? They start with a problem and ask, what do we need to solve this? There's a quote often attributed to Einstein about this constantly. If I had an hour to solve a problem, I spend 55 minutes thinking about the problem and then 5 minutes thinking about the solutions. That is the analyst mindset. You don't ever rush to the data. You try to deeply understand the problem. Because here's what happens in real life. Someone will come to you and say, sales are down, can you look into it? A beginner will just open up the database and just start pulling numbers. But a professional asks questions first. Which sales, which region, which time period, compared to what? What changed recently? This is where the 5 whys technique becomes so invaluable. It was developed from Toyota and they still use it today to solve any root cause for any problem. Business thinking is about asking better questions before you even touch the data. All right, pillar number 2. core technical literacy. Now, you do need technical skills, but probably not as many as you think. Here's what enough looks like for most entry level and mid level analyst roles: spreadsheets, Excel or Google Sheets. You need to be comfortable cleaning data, building pivot tables, and writing basic formulas and creating simple charts. This is where a huge amount of business analysis happens. SQL, absolute non-negotiable. You need to be able to pull data confidently from databases. This means understanding joins, aggregations, filtering, and basic subqueries. Most technical interviews will test you on SQL. Then visualization, Tableau or Power BI. Pick one, learn to build dashboards that answer specific business questions. Not dashboards that look pretty, but dashboards that guide decisions. That's the core. You don't necessarily need to be a wizard at any of these, but you need to be confident enough to solve real problems. Pillar 3, communication and storytelling. This is the force multiplier. Everything else you learn becomes more valuable when you can communicate it clearly. LinkedIn Workforce Data constantly lists communication and analytical reasoning as their top most in-demand soft skills. It's not about Python or machine learning, communication. Here's an analogy that you can remember. Having great data without communication is like having a nice looking Ferrari with no tires. It looks very impressive and very pretty, but it's not going anywhere and it's completely useless. I've watched many people with average technical skills get promoted fast because they can explain their findings extremely clearly. They can walk into a room, simplify a complex problem, and make the recommendation with confidence. And I've watched brilliant technical people get stuck because every time they presented, they just confused everyone in the room. Your dashboard doesn't get promoted, you do. And your ability to make a stakeholder understand and trust your analysis, that is what gets you rewarded. All right, pillar number 4, proof of skill. Let's end the certificate debate right here. A certificate might help you start learning, but it rarely gets you hired. And because hiring managers don't trust claims, they trust evidence. Proof means projects. Proof means a portfolio. Proof means real examples of your thinking that someone can look and say, okay, this person actually knows and actually is doing the work. Your portfolio is not a place to just dump projects. It is a sales asset. It is what makes a recruiter pause and think, hey, this person is different. I should get them in for an interview. When I was breaking in, my portfolio opened so many doors that my resume could not. It showed people what I could do before I even had to explain it. So how do people actually land these roles? There's no single path, but there are patterns. And here's something that might encourage you. According to Birchworks, about 40% of data professionals come from non-STEM backgrounds. The technical wall is thinner than you think. So path number 1, career transitions. You take your existing experience and you translate it into analyst language. Teacher, you've been tracking student performance and identifying who needs intervention. That's analysis. Nurse, you've been monitoring patient data and spotting patterns and outcomes. That's analysis. Retail manager, you've been looking at sales trends and adjusting inventory. That's also analysis. Path 2, internal moves. You become the data person at your current job before you ever change titles. This path is underrated because it gives you real stakeholders, real messy data, and real outcomes that you can actually put on your resume. You're not simulating experience, you're actually building it. Path 3, portfolio projects and volunteer work. If you can't get formal experience, you can create it yourself. Reach out to your local nonprofit, offer help to make sense of their donor data or event attendance, whatever data that they have. Do a 30-day project and deliver a dashboard and slide deck. Now you have real experience, not hypothetical, real. The key mindset is simple. You don't need perfection, you need direction, decisions, and validation. Okay, so a goal without a plan is just a wish. And that is what happens when people try to learn this career without structure. They wish their way through random YouTube videos and hope something sticks. But here's how to think about it. This video gives you clarity, a roadmap gives you sequence, and a course or program gives you support, feedback, and structure. They're not competing, they're stacking. Think of a course like a GPS. You can drive across country without one, but you're going to take the wrong turns. And you're going to waste time backtracking. But a GPS cannot drive for you. It only keeps you on the highway, but it keeps you on the right path. The hardest part of this journey isn't finding information, it's knowing what to ignore. It's knowing what order to learn things, and it's getting feedback before you practice the wrong thing for 6 months. If you've been doing random learning, that is why you feel stuck. All right, so before we wrap this up, I want to help you figure out if this is actually the right path for you. I call this the Sherlock Holmes test. Sherlock doesn't just look at things, he observes, and he notices what everyone else misses. If you see a Netflix recommendation and wonder how the algorithm knows you so well that you see like 90s sci-fi thrillers, you're probably thinking like an analyst. If you read a statistic in the news and immediately question where that data even comes from, congratulations, you got the right instincts. This career is a great fit for you if you are naturally curious, patient with ambiguity, willing to ask questions that might seem too obvious, and more interested in impact than aesthetics. This career might frustrate you if you want to work in complete isolation, you hate meetings and stakeholder conversations, you only enjoy the coding part and never want to explain your work, and if you need constant novelty and get bored with repetition. Analytics involves people, a lot of people, and if you hate that part, you will be miserable no matter how good your sequel is. All right, quick pause. Now, if you want to land your first job in data analytics and avoid the lengthy mistakes that I did, click the link in the pinned comment where you can find the exact steps that my students use to land their job in data analytics without going back to school. All right, now let's get back to it. Okay, so now that you understand what data analytics actually is, the next question becomes, how do you learn it in the right order without wasting months on the wrong things? Because clarity only helps when you can turn it into a plan. And here's what most people mess up. They'll build skills in a complete random order and then wonder why interviews never come. So in the next video, I walk you through the exact roadmap, what to learn first, what to skip entirely, and how to turn your learning into proof that actually gets you hired. I'll see you in the next one.